Hello, in this video we're going to cover quality control in China, right from before even selecting a factory to work with to post-shipment of your product. And the most important thing to remember when dealing with factories in China is, again, it's buyer beware. It's totally down to you to check the quality and to be responsible for the quality of the products. If something goes wrong with a new factory that you're using, it's very unlikely that they're going to fix it or pay for the costs of fixing it or shipping it back and reworking the product. So you need to take as much care as possible right from the sourcing stage to ensure that the goods meet your standard. It's before you make the final payment, you have to be checking that the goods are correct, and that could be a representative of yours with an inspection company, an agent, someone you trust on the ground, or yourself visiting the factory and checking. But regardless, the factory is going to make promises about it, that it has quality control, that they've done this product many times before, they know what they're doing. But the reality is, a lot of the factory workers make $200 to $300 or $400 a month. They don't use the items that you are ordering on a day-to-day basis. They don't know how the end product should look. So, quality control starts at the sourcing stage. You've reached out to every factory on Alibaba and global sources. You've got back quotes and prices. You've selected 3 to 5 factories that you think are around the right price range for your product. Then what you want to do is to request final samples from each one of those factories. And even though one factory may look very good on paper, have great images, tell you all about their quality control standard, you'll get the sample through the post and it'll be shit. It'll just be awful. You'll know straight away that this factory has a very low standard. And then another factory where you weren't sure, you're on the borderline, maybe they've got a great price and a great quality sample and product. A few things to remember: price, sample, and production and quality overall are 3 very unrelated things when dealing with Chinese factories. So one factory may quote you $1 for an item, another may quote you $2, but the one for $1 might be a much higher standard sample than the one for $2. But when it comes to production, the one who gave you the great sample, the best price, might be the worst at production. You never know. That's why they have to go through all of these different stages, which I'll outline in this video. Take your time with the first order, check all the details, ideally visit the factory, definitely get an inspection during the production while the goods are in China, because there's no guarantee. Even if the samples are great, the price is great, the emails from the factory have been great, your communication's been great, but they may still have issues actually manufacturing the order itself. So, sourcing stage, you've arranged samples. You've got 3 to 5 samples now. 2 of them look good, 3 of them look bad. So those 2 factories you're considering going further with. At this stage, I would strongly recommend that you go to China to visit your intended suppliers, because you'll learn so much about the product, the production, and the factory itself before placing the order that could really help you, 1, improve the product, 2, be certain of knowing who you're dealing with, and 3 is to then also check the quality of the products that they have in their existing production line, so you can get an idea and a feel for how good they are. And so, having visited, you'll know exactly which factory you would prefer to use. Judging just from emails, phone calls, the samples in hand is much harder. It's difficult to know the factory you're dealing with is going to be good. So at this stage, you're already taking a risk because you're choosing to work with a supplier blind. So what I'd recommend for the first order, you try to keep the ordered quantity as low as possible, and definitely do these next steps I'm going to cover in this video as well during the production process, if you're ordering from a factory just off a sample, having never visited. Okay, so you've received the 2 samples from the 2 factories you want to go with. Based on the price, the quality of those samples, and your communication with them, you've chosen one that you think, okay, this is the supply I'm gonna test out. This is the supply I'm gonna go with. At this stage, what I strongly recommend you do is, one, you contact the factory and ask for free golden samples. A golden sample is basically the final approved sample that will be used as the standard by you, the factory, and any third-party inspection company. You need to review those free samples, sign them off, send one back to the factory, hold two. Then that's what you've bought. That's what you've agreed to buy. That's the standard you've agreed to buy. Before signing off that sample and labeling it, so what you'd normally use is something like, let me find this image, just labeling it, showing that the dates you sign and any remarks on it. Before you sign off that sample, what you want to do is play with it, use it for a day or two, see if there's any loose parts. If it's something with a lid, make sure all the lid's screwed on. If there's any screws, make sure that they're all tight. These are the kind of things that usually get missed. That most of the issues I've had have been around where there's screws loose, parts loose, not fully tightened. So what you want to do is play with the item, write down everything you think could possibly go wrong with it. Things, color, scratching during production, screws loose, parts not stuck together well, wrong material being used. Is it possible that if it's a bag related item, something with fabric in, you need to really look at the quality of the material, how it's stitched, where it can go wrong. Are there any problem areas that you think this? At the same time, what you also want to do is ask the factory, when making this kind of product, what are the potential issues that they think can go wrong. You want to know this up front. You want to agree with the factory a certain standard up front before placing the order. Yes, this will slow you down by 3 or 4 days going back and forth. 1, inspecting the quality of the sample. 2, discussing with the factory what are the typical major and minor defects for a product like this. What can possibly go wrong? Where do they think they need to take the most care? And even if you end up discussing with the factory and finding a few things which you're not happy with, you can offer to pay them 5% more for the same item, but ask them for a slightly higher standard. You're better off doing all of this up front and taking the time to really review everything, because it will save you so much time and money down the road if something goes wrong. So prior to placing the order, you've reviewed the sample, you've discussed it with the factory, you've now signed off the golden sample, sent one back to the factory for production, and you've issued the purchase order, you've paid them the deposit, normally 30%, and said, fine, okay, start with production, and I would like regular updates at different stages of production. And usually what's happening with production, maybe they've quoted you a 4 or 6 week lead time. The first 3 weeks, they're just getting materials from their subcontractors. And once all the materials are in, and it's your turn on the production queue, then they'll start to manufacture your goods. Ideally, again, either yourself or a representative of yours, you want to go and visit while they're still making the first couple of 100 pieces of your item. And the reason is, it's at this stage that you can prevent or catch any issues and compare it to the golden sample which you've signed off to make sure it's all okay. So this is called a mid-production inspection, and I recommend that you hire a company to go, and I'll go over a couple of companies that I've worked with in the past that I can recommend to you that can do this for you. Or if you're using an agent in China, that you ask them to go and send you photos. And so what you want from the mid-production inspection is a general check against the golden sample. You want photos of the products being made to make sure they're okay, double checking those defect lists that you've already discussed with the factory to make sure it's okay. You're just trying to check as early on as possible to make sure everything that the factory is doing matches what you think you're ordering and what you're going to get. Sometimes there's a big divide, and sometimes at this stage of production, even though the factory's made a similar item 100 times before, something comes up. The stitching's not quite right. The backing material which they ordered from their subcontractors is different to what you expected. The print color doesn't match what you you're expecting either. So even the most basic of items, even a simple bag, a simple cosmetic bag, may have 100 steps in production. It may have multiple parts coming from multiple different subcontractor suppliers, and every one of those can go wrong, which is why it's essential to check the quality at every stage throughout the production cycle for the first order and every subsequent order, because there's so many different factors that make up the final product. Even if it's a very simple silicon item, there's still things that can go wrong because there's subcontractors involved, there's multiple steps in the process. Maybe the workers are tired that day, maybe it's a new worker who's never made that item before. He's just got his job 2 weeks ago in this new factory. He's been given one part of the production cycle to do. He's been shown for about an hour what to do. He's not really sure, and he's the one making your product. There's all of these things that can go wrong during the production process. So inspect. It costs you 3 to 5% of the order value to check the quality upfront and during production, instead of losing that whole 100% if something goes wrong later, or even losing more than that because you have to pay the shipping costs or the air or sea freight before even finding out that something's gone wrong with your product. So check. So we have the sourcing stage, selecting the factory stage, sample stage, the golden sample stage, during production inspection, and then when the final goods are ready, before the shipment, there's something called a pre-shipment inspection. So you're checking all the goods are packed in their cartons, ready to go, and you have someone go in and check the quality of the goods. I don't know who Zero Group is. I'm just using this photo for reference to show you. So here you have all the goods ready to go. Just before going on sea or air, you hire an inspection company to go in and do a random statistical sample from the goods and check the quality against your golden sample. The standard that is used is something called AQL, and I'll go into that in a moment. I've worked with some of the largest inspection companies in the world. There's one called SGS, who have offices throughout China. They do factory audits, mid-production inspections, pre-shipment inspections, every kind. So you just need to get in contact with them at least a couple of weeks before the goods are expected to be ready and book an inspection. Give them the golden sample, give them the quality points that you've discussed with the factory before placing the order, so they're aware of potential issues that can go wrong. So SGS, just to explain the inspection side of things to you a little, they inspect for Walmart, Tesco, all major buyers around the world. They do everything from electronics to household goods to fabric items. But you have to remember, the individual inspector who's going to do your goods, maybe in his 3 or 5 year career as a QC inspector, he's checked your type of product once before or never before. Just because this is a world leading inspection and testing company, the individual staff going to check your products may or may not be experienced in that type of product. They may know very little about it, and all they're doing is using the golden sample which you've provided and visually checking against that, and from their own experience from other products, to try to pull out issues. But what if you've ordered a bag item and there's a zip issue which only an experienced inspector could find, because it's something that seems okay if you check it for 3 or 5 seconds, but if you move the zip up 50 times and then it starts to come undone, you wouldn't know that, he wouldn't know that. These things are difficult to catch. That's why the more experience you build up in a particular product, then you'll be able to set the inspection standard higher to be able to prevent those kind of defects. But all I'm saying overall is to remember, even though you're hiring a third-party inspection person, whether a Western company that has offices in China or large international inspection companies, the individual staff who go to check the quality of your products may or may not be experienced. So you need to provide the golden sample, photos of the product exactly how it should be, as much detail as possible about what to look out for, things to check. That's your responsibility to provide that. And then they'll go to the factory, they'll check the goods, they'll send you a photos and a report of how the goods performed versus the industry standard sampling method, and I'll go into that in a moment. So there's SGS I've used before, Intertek I've used before. Intertek is another large international inspection company, and there's another company which came up while I was based in China, Asia Inspection. I've never used them myself, but they've been growing rapidly. You can check them out. I think their price here is $309 for a product inspection, pre-shipment inspection, production monitoring, during production check, initial production check, container loading check. So really, I recommend at a minimum you should be doing a pre-shipment inspection before every order that goes out. I've not used Asia Inspection. I have used Intertek and SGS. And then another thing you need to remember is, okay, so the inspector goes into the factory. Maybe the goods are borderline. Maybe they're just okay. Maybe they're just not okay. $200-300 gets slipped into the inspector's hands, and the goods are fine. You won't know this. It's very hard to catch unless you're on site. I mean, I've been in factories in China, and while I'm there, a big brand's inspector will come in to check the goods, and I've watched the factory bribe the guy. So it's something to be aware of, that even though you're getting a third-party inspector, there is the possibilities of bribes. There is the possibility of the goods not quite matching. With companies like SGS and Intertek, they have processes to try to prevent that, but it does still occur. It's something to be aware of. There's no guarantee that just because the inspection report is a pass, that the goods are fine. So, as an extra layer, for myself, what I would always do is I would visit a factory on the first inspection and be there while the inspector inspects and randomly check myself, so I knew what was happening, and to get a feel for whether the inspection report is accurate versus how I see the quality of the goods. What I recommend you do if you're not in China and you can't go to visit the factory prior to shipment is to ask the factory to send 10 or 20 final productions products to you by DHL, and wait to get those and check them yourself before shipping the whole bulk of goods. Because once you've shipped out by sea or air, in effect to the factory you're saying, yeah, the goods are fine, ship them, I'll take delivery, and the responsibility and the headache now shifts to you. Prior to paying the deposit, the balance payment, after paying the 30% deposit, you still owe the factory 70% before shipment. Prior to paying that, if you catch the problem, the factory are in a weaker negotiation position and more likely to help you fix the goods faster because they want the payment and they want to get the goods out. If you've shipped by sea or air, it can be relatively expensive, and if you then find the issue when the goods arrive in the US, it's very unlikely that the factory is going to cover the sea or air cost of sending the goods back or repairing the goods. So really, you need to try to check this and catch everything before shipping out. So in addition to the pre-shipment inspection, you want 10 to 20 samples as a minimum to be sent to you to check, to review, even though you've also got an inspector going into the factory. It's just an additional layer to try to catch any potential issues, and then that way you can compare the inspection report and what's said in the inspection to the samples you've got. The inspector will check more than you do. Maybe he checks 100 or 200 samples. You're only checking 10 or 20, and then that way you can compare the two. And even if you're getting the goods shipped to you in the US before going on to Amazon or other fulfillment centers, you need to have checked them in China, because once they're on that plane or the airplane, or the boat, it becomes very, very expensive. So there's a standard used throughout China for product inspections. It's called AQL. It's basically a random sampling method. It looks complicated, but it's relatively simple. So The industry standard is to use a general inspection level of 2. Lot size just means the size of the shipment, and so you're using these tables to determine how many samples you need to take out and then how many defects are allowed. So I'll explain this to you. Let's say that we have a shipment of 5,000 pieces of products. Then what we would do is general inspection level 2, 3,201 to 10,000 L, so 5,000 here. L, so we would take L number of samples. L is 200 samples. So the inspector for a shipment of 5,000 pieces will randomly select from all the cartons, some at the front, some at the back, some at the top, some at the bottom, 200 samples. And from those 200 samples, again, we have another set of standards ranging from 0.065 to 65. 0.065 being the strictest and 65 being the most lenient as to how many goods can have a major or a minor defect. Okay, so let's say the standard is 1 for example purposes, and you have a sample size of 200. So 1, 200, 5 defects is an accept, 6 defects is a reject. So these numbers are statistically calculated based on probability, and so on a sample size of 200 coming out of 5,000 goods, if you have six issues, the chances are, the probability is there's a frequent number of issues within the shipment, and so it's rejected. But all you need to know is, once you've set these standards, is 5 is accept, 6 is reject. The shipment will be checked then by the inspector based on your standard, and it'll be accepted or rejected based on that standard. You don't need to go into the maths behind it, but if there's too many defects, then the factory is going to need to open up all the cartons, rework the goods, and fix it. So here we have 3,201 to 10,000. We're taking 200 samples. And what's typical is, one, you set the inspection level. And so the standard here is AQL. You would tell the factory, and this would go on your purchase order at the start. And really, you want to be telling them when you're getting the quotes, because it affects the price. The quality standard affects the price. So AQL inspection level 2, major, minor. Okay, major means a major defect, and minor means a minor defect. And major defects and minor defects are down to what you in the factory define them as. But let me give you an example. If you've got a product with your logo on it, and the logo is scratched, that can instantly be considered a major defect. But if there's a small scratch on the back of the product, that can be considered a minor defect. It's all relative. There's no 100% absolutes as to what's a major and a minor defect. Major brands have that reorder packaging or bags regularly. They have a list of items which they consider major with a size. For example, any scratch above 2 millimeters on the front surface of the box is a major. Any scratch above 1 cm on the back is a major. Anything below that is acceptable. And so they have these lists of potential major and minor defects and the exact standard of what's allowed, and that's what they give to the inspectors to use. In your case, you've discussed with the factory potential issues, you've said what isn't acceptable, and so you would set the standard for major and minor, but you're going off the judgment of the inspector the first order to classify those, because you've never ordered this product before. And then on your second and your third inspection, what you should be doing is creating a list of major and minor potential defects, classifying them, giving them a limit, saying, okay, if this comes up, it's major, this comes up, it's minor, watch out for these issues. And you should create a document for your inspector to use that has those defined in them. So you would set the AQL level as 2, because that's the industry standard, and then you would have a major 2.5, minor 4.0. That means that for 2.5 with 200 samples, anything under 10 defects is accepted shipment. Anything under 14 minor is accepted shipment. If you had 9 major defects and 13 minor, this still passes. It's not cumulative. The major is considered on its own and the minor is considered on its own. But that's the great thing about getting a pre-shipment inspection, is if you had 9 major and 13 minor and the inspectors found that, sent you photos of what those different things are, at least you're aware of the issues of the product before it ships, and you could ask the factory to send you some example defects to you, 10 or 20 samples, so you can see for yourself how bad it is. You could ask the factory to rework the goods, and the factory at this stage are going to argue with you and push you to accept the goods, because if they have to rework your goods, it means that they have to stop the production of another profitable order, put your stuff back into the production cycle, redo it, and then get it inspected again. 1, they're not getting their 70% balance payment. 2, they're not getting to make another profitable order. 3, they're having to spend more labor cost and more time on your goods. So the factory are going to do everything possible to argue with you to take the goods as they are. But it's down to you to keep your cool and just talk through the reasons why you need them to take certain actions. For example, if there's too many major or too many minor defects found in an inspection, you need to get them to rework, show them the photos from the inspection and give them the reasons why, and hold firm, be polite, don't lose your cool, but just realize that the factory is going to argue tooth and nail to try to get you to just accept the goods as they are, because there's a big cost for them for fixing any issues, which they don't want to take. And so that pretty much covers the initial steps you can take to manage quality control in China. Just to recap, we're starting at the sourcing stage, carefully selecting which factories we want to deal with, ideally visiting them, getting samples, checking the quality prior to placing the order, getting golden samples to sign off and approve, 1 for the factory, 1 for you, 1 for a third-party inspection company. You're doing a mid-production check early on in the first order just to make sure everything's okay, getting photos from the factory at that from the inspector at that stage as well. Prior to shipment, you're getting a pre-shipment inspection with a company like Intertek or SGS or Asia Inspection. They're going in, they're a third party, they'll check against your samples, they'll send you a report and photos of what they find with the products. It's $300. I mean, if you ship by air, you might be paying $1,000 to $3,000 for the air shipment. So if that $300 inspection saves you the cost and loss of the goods and the air shipment, it's paid for itself many times over. And personally, every single shipment that ever leaves China, I have someone on my quality control team to go in and check. And every single time there's something that doesn't quite match the original specification, because there's many subcontracted parts, there's many moving parts, the workers, the turnover in workers in factories can be 10-20% a month. So there's 10 or 20% new workers every month who don't know that product or have never made that product before, or never used it into day-to-day life. And the other thing you can do is always ask for 10 or 20 samples before the goods ship out for you to check yourself. Check every shipment that you're doing, even if it's your 10th order with the same factory and everything's been smooth. There's so many moving parts. It's not expensive to just check the quality and make sure it's all okay, and be sure before shipping out the goods. If the inspector goes in and there's an issue, then you can request 10 or 20 samples of the products with the issue, so you can determine yourself whether this issue is acceptable or not, whether your customers are going to accept the goods with that minor tiny scratch on the back or not. And it's inevitable with so many moving parts, stitching, silicone goods, metal goods, that there's something, small defects, small scratches, small dents, they come up. It's almost unavoidable, especially when you consider that the goods are mainly made on little tables like this, manhandled along the way. And yes, the factory will do a so-called quality check, but that could be 5 seconds and 1 in 100 products that they check. So it's down to you. Take the time, especially on your first order, to check every step of the way that everything's okay. and then over time build up a list of things that are and are not acceptable. Keep the initial order smaller to reduce the risk, and then always have a pre-shipment inspection by a third-party company using a golden sample to check, and then everything should be okay for your production. Thank you.